Huntsville 35801. I represent Dwight Wright, the owner of the property known as the Kildare House or O'Shaughnessy Place or McCormick Place or whatever, and I think y'all are all familiar with it. 1 year ago, almost exactly 1 year ago, y'all granted a license to Mr. Wright to build a fence in the city right-of-way. I was not a part of those negotiations, and nothing I say is meant to reflect on those that were. But unfortunately, there were two problems, I think, big problems with that license, which is what you're asked to revoke tonight. One was there were absolutely no specifications with regard to the fence. There was no description of the kind of fence that was to be built. There was no limitation on height, width, material, what it looked like of any kind whatsoever. And in the resolution before you and in the discussions, there's been a lot of discussion about what was represented, and there's a lot of disagreement as what the discussion was. But at no time was Mr. Wright ever told, you must do this, you cannot do this, you must build it this way, or it must conform to something. The second unfortunate thing in that agreement is what's before you tonight, really, is that it is revocable at will. That is, the city can revoke that license at any time for good cause, no cause, bad cause, whatever else, which leaves Mr. Wright in the position that he has absolutely no security of any kind after investing an awfully lot of money in building the fence. For the last about 6 months, we have been involved in negotiations with the city. Mr. Joffrin has been very accommodating to me and has been available. Unfortunately, only Mr. Joffrin was available. We had asked, but we were never able to sit down at a table with all of the decision makers in regard to this fence. And we asked to do so, and I was repeatedly told when proposals were made to Mr. Joffrin, well, I'll have to check with the decision makers. But we were never allowed to meet in a meeting and have a give and take with the decision makers. One of the kind of problems we faced in this negotiation is 2 years ago, that is a year before this agreement was entered into, Mr. Wright placed in the right-of-way some large stones to keep people from driving into his yard, driving into the shrubbery, driving into the berm where the shrubbery is. A year ago, when this agreement was entered into, those large stones were never mentioned. In the discussion or negotiations that have gone on since, I think, December or January, those stones were never mentioned. When I received a draft of the proposed agreement yesterday morning, one of the provisions of that draft was that those stones had to be removed. First time Mr. Wright and I have ever heard of it, and those stones have been there for 2 years. That's another one of just the omissions from this license agreement. When you were first confronted with this issue, what you were told and heard was the issue is liability. City's liability if somebody drives into the fence, if the fence falls over and hits somebody, that was the primary issue presented to you. Mr. Wright countered and we said, fine, we will indemnify the city and hold them harmless, and we will back that up by adding the city as an additional insured to a $500,000 liability insurance policy. So if anything happens with the fence and the city were to get sued, Mr. Wright's insurance carrier would have to defend the city and pay any judgment against the city up to $500,000. That meant then we were told the height of the fence was the problem. And we reached an agreement that we would lower the fence to 8 feet. And the purpose of this fence is to keep primarily young people coming in the middle of the night from throwing beer cans and rocks. It won't keep them from yelling, but it would at least keep them from doing things that would destroy the house. And we had reached an agreement in regard to the 8-foot height of the fence. I thought we were almost there, But the one thing we kept being told was this revocable at will, that anytime 3 members of the council wanted to cancel this agreement, Mr. Wright would have to tear the fence down. We made a proposal that you give him 3 years where the city could not revoke it. And I don't think there's any plans to widen Kildare within the next 3 years. I don't think that right away, that is a problem. And we said, except in an emergency situation, and the city would have a right. And then give 7 more years, total of 10, where it would be revocable by the city council for good cause shown, which is a phrase that is very frequently used in contracts and leases. It means that on a whim, and I don't imply that any one of the 4 of you sitting on there on a whim would do this, but you may not always be there. And that any time 3 members of the council wanted to, they could come in here, they could revoke the lease, and Mr. Wright would have to tear down a very expensive fence he has bought. We forget in all of this discussion, this is a very valuable historic property. It is an asset to the city of Huntsville. I think Mr. Wright has made available to you a opinion by the state, a man with the State Historical Commission, that this is one of the most valuable houses of its type in the state of Alabama. The house was up for foreclosure at the time Mr. Wright bought it. He wants to preserve the house. He hopes to have the money over time to invest to bring it back to its real glory. But having this fence is essential to it. And what really broke the negotiations down was he could not live with the fact that he was being asked to invest a lot of money in building the fence, in moving the water meters, which was discussion, out of the right-of-way. And the water meters are his next-door neighbor's water meters, but they're in the right-of-way of this house. The minor thing we would ask tonight, well, the major thing is for you not to pass this resolution. Do not cancel this license and say, you've got to get the fence down. What we would like is, one, for you to say, let's leave those rocks there. And I'm not being ugly about it, but you drive through this city and you look at lawns where there are not curb and gutter. And all over the city, people have placed rocks in the right-of-way to keep people from driving into their yard or into their shrubs or into their fence. We would like that. And secondly, to say that this is not revocable at will, but there is a period of time, and we would like 3 years, that it would be irrevocable, and then a period of time where it would be revocable for only for good cause. That's what we would like. We will even accept saying, okay, there won't be the 3 years, but there is 7 years, 10 years, whatever. But that it would be revocable only for cause. That if city department heads came before you and say, the fence is in awful shape, it's whatever, and y'all had a reason to do it, then it would be a reason to revoke it. But to have Mr. Wright not to know every morning when he wakes up that somebody's going to say, okay, we're going to city council and tell them just because we want it down to take it down. And I know you're tired of this issue. I know it's been before you an awfully lot. This first time I've been here. But I really plead with you, this house is a valuable asset to this city. Preserve it. Don't make Mr. Wright move his rocks, but most of all, instruct the city attorney to go forward with negotiations with us. We'll make it an 8-foot fence. We will deliver to Mr. Joffrey, in which he's been asking for, a detailed description of the fence which would go in the lease. But all we want is that it can't be revoked except for good cause. And I think that's a very reasonable request. Thank you.